Right, there seems to be no shortage of Labour factions these days, doesn't there? Keir Starmer exemplifying this, of course, with his war on the left. Nothing more factional than that, of course, more so than his war on the Tories ever is. But there are always these various associated groups. Some may be affiliated to the Labour Party, some may not be, but all of them prepared to support Team Keith in their attacks, often attempting to justify it in a multitude of different ways. There's the Jewish Labour movement, there is Progress, there is Labour to Win, but one other is actually a think tank, Labour Together, and they publish what they think is evidence, what they're calling evidence, that Starmer is on the road to electoral success, but which I found to have more holes in it than a Swiss cheese. Labour Together are run by an assortment of former right-wing Labour staff figures, bankers and Blairite speechwriters even. The Labour MPs involved with them giving more of an obvious indication of the think tank's leanings, though. People such as Shabana Mahmood, who seconded Starmer's motion to block Jeremy Corbyn from standing as a Labour candidate come the next election. There's Steve Reid, who in an interview just last week announced Labour would not be addressing the inequality between capital gains tax, the tax paid on dividends and rental income, mainly the preserve of the wealthy, of course, and that of income tax, which we all pay on our ordinary wages. And then there's Wes Streeting, cheerleading for the involvement of private health in the NHS. He's involved with them as well. So you can see which faction this lot are behind. So them producing a report exalting the rise of Starmerism shouldn't be that surprising, perhaps, but obviously should be handled with a rather large pinch of salt. Yesterday, they published this report called Red Shift. What dynamic stuff. Of course, this was accompanied by praise from those aforementioned right-wing MPs. 56 pages of dross is what it consists of, and it states this is Labour's path to power. Their executive summary begins by saying a little over 3 years ago, writing such a report would have been laughable, as Labour slumped to its worst defeat in 84 years. That worst performance since 1935 line trotted out subtly from the get-go. I'm not going to go into the details again as to why this isn't a very honest interpretation of measuring the result of the 2019 general election. I did a video the other day covering this, and of course it completely omits the near victory just 2 years before, where Labour won its first seats in Parliament since the 1997 Blair landslide. But we all know they'd rather forget about 2017, don't we? The entire premise of this piece of work, and piece of work it is to split the electorate up into 6 subgroups, pigeonholing the entire populace based on supposed economic and social attitudes as they see them. And they've done this because, as they state in their introduction, they think too much emphasis is put on analysis of the average voter, an actual voter. So they've just made some up. First, they've introduced us to English traditionalists, who they have dubbed Workington Man, which is the right-wing think tank Onward actually came up with. They coined this phrase, but the Labour Together are happy to adopt as well, because differences and fag papers between these two think tanks spring to mind. Workington Man was the voter that Labour lost in 2019, from a high in 2017, let's not forget. But he's the guy who went to Boris Johnson and voted for his oven-ready turkey twizzler of a Brexit deal, apparently. The only issue really being discussed throughout that campaign, of course. Plenty of people across the political spectrum voted for Brexit and turned away from Labour, having taken the Starmer stance of wanting a second referendum and detonating Labour's chances as the populace, sick and tired of Brexit as we were 3 years after voting leave, voted to put an end to the misery, little realising the mess we'd be enduring as we now are, more than 3 years now after that. Workington Man is the guy who left Labour in 2019 for Johnson, despite having voted Labour in 2017, perhaps due to the transformative agenda on offer then. But not so, according to Labour Together, because they see Workington Man, the red wall Tory voter of 2019, as socially conservative and economically interventionalist, big words there, but is now disillusioned with the Tory mess we see today. It's funny, but you'd think this, as a demographic in how they are described, would have entirely gone to the Tories then. But the report actually admits only 49% of this group they've dreamt up did actually go to the Tories. They're now saying 56% would back Labour. Well, the implication is that 51% backed Labour in 2019 then, yes? So Team Keith would have won back 5% of these voters, and that's tide turning now, is it? They call the Tory vote amongst this demographic as having cratered. But that's not very true, really, is it? They actually quote the figure as being a 15% swing, but that would imply their Workington Man wasn't necessarily a Labour voter previously so. So who the hell is Workington Man, really? The second of Labour's Together's invented people exemplifies the disillusioned suburbans, who they have called Stevenage woman, so called because whoever Stevenage has voted for since 1983 has gone on to be the party that forms the next government. According to the think tank, Stevenage woman is the young, hard-working, underpaid person in the towns and suburbs in their view, yet still they're considered to be like Workington man in being socially conservative and economically interventionalist. So basically the same as above, except without a red wall accent. I don't know if Labour Together really speak to many young people, but they certainly turned out for Corbyn. They were key to building the socialist Labour movement back from 2015 onwards, having been disconnected entirely from politics, feeling nobody represented them. You reckon they're socially conservative when society's on its knees? You think it's working for them so they're okay? Bit of economic tinkering will bring them to Team Keith? Well, according to this lot, 44% of people like Stevenage woman backed the Tories in 2019, with 51% now backing Labour, something they call a swing of 23% to Labour. But I don't really think Stevenage woman exists. Labour Together figures she forms the bulk of voters, though, and holds the key to Downing Street. Am I wrong? Is Stevenage woman out there? Are you really socially conservative after backing Corbyn? Are you Stevenage woman? Identify yourself, please. These two are the two figments of a fevered imagination, frankly, that are set to deliver power to Labour, according to this think tank, both just happening to be socially conservative and economically interventionalist, which, of course, just happens to chime precisely with the red Tory musings of the Labour right. This is, to my mind, just an exercise in them trying to sell why they're right and why the left were wrong. But having not won any seats since 1997 themselves, it's the politics of the 1990s they're selling, hoping the Tories are going to implode as they did ahead of the Blair landslide. The left can point to stats won in 2017 and a Tory majority destroyed. It might not have delivered power to Labour, but it was on the right path, and that despite this same faction, the same Labour right sabotaging the left because they weren't in control. Well, they are in control again now. God knows they like reminding us of the fact. This is just proving to me they still have no ideas. They have no vision to offer. They're just making up excuses dressed up as imaginary people. The remaining four options, four made-up figures, are less important, it would seem. If you identify with any of these, you don't matter to election victory to Team Keith on the face of this report. You can do as you like, vote as you like, and if anyone tells you you're helping the Tories win by doing so, you can show them this and say, look, the Labour right say I don't matter. Indeed, they matter so little to Labour Together, they didn't even bother to think up fancy names for them. Person 3 is just known as activist left. Apparently, these are all young people fresh from university degrees and in work, concentrated in cities and large towns with above average incomes. They are the only ones of Labour Together's 6 made-up people to have still backed Labour in 2019, being economically left-wing and socially liberal, being pro-migration and pro-tackling climate change. They back wealth redistribution and are more politically engaged. This is basically all the people who were disillusioned with politics that Corbyn turned into activists. I don't identify with any of those characteristics, but I do identify with this ethos and this title. Corbyn turned people into activists and voters by offering them a transformative vision that chimed with their beliefs, which every other government up until him had ignored. No, I'm not that young anymore. I wasn't in 2015 when I became politically active. Like so many others, age has nothing to do with disillusionment. And I did indeed back Labour in 2019, as I did in 2017. But hell will freeze over before I do so now. And of those who have left Labour, now almost half the size it was at the height under Corbyn, the majority of those who have left, I think, like me, identify with this group. But Labour Together says that 70% of this group backed Labour in 2019, yet now say this figure has risen to 75%. I would suggest it is more believable that most of this group have probably left Labour, won't be voting Labour. And if they vote at all, we'll be backing smaller parties like the Greens instead. The inroads they've been making in elections across the country of late seem to bear that out. The percentage has risen because the number of people identifying as activists left, still supporting Labour, has dwindled. And the percentages are simply skewed in their direction now. Person 4 is the centrist liberal. It's James O'Brien, folks. Apparently this group have the highest incomes, and there was me thinking it was Tory donors. Socially liberal and economically centre-left, wanting much of the same things as the activist left person, but not to the same degree, favouring, for example, economic growth over climate change. These are the Lib Dems, in essence, yet Labour Together would have you believing they abandoned Labour instead in 2019, with 36% of them backing the Tories, yet now Labour claims 54 of them backed them. Now, it's no secret that the Lib Dems have still never recovered from going into coalition with the Tories, so there could be an element of truth in that this centrist liberal person has not returned to them. However, it's also true that this is the natural home of the Blairite, the economically centre-left stuff being gumph. Centrist is centrist, meaningless is meaningless. If Starmer is appealing to anyone, I think it's got to be this one. Person 5 is the patriotic left. If you're looking to be insulted, hang on to your hats here, folks. According to Labour Together, you'll be from the Red Wall, as well as prevalent in Yorkshire, Wales, the North West, and the West Midlands. The patriotic left is not university educated, and most likely to be out of work. It's those on the lowest incomes and mostly rent. They reckon 15% of the electorate fit this description. Labour Together imagine this person to be both socially conservative and economically left-wing. They'll be anti-migrant and pro-patriotism, so they love a bit of Keith having fun with flags, preferably as many as possible then. Do their knuckles drag on the floor too, or was that a bit too on the nose for you think tankers? There's nothing left-wing about this vision of a person at all. Of such people exist fitting such a description, they'll be more likely burning down hotels with asylum seekers in them than demanding change for the many, not the few. But God forbid a right-wing think tank admit such people are actually right-wing and not left-wing. I also don't buy it for an instant that they make up 15% of the population. The low incomes, the out of work, they'll have lumped the long-term sick and disabled under this header as well. I have no doubt about that. 49% of this faux demographic apparently backed the Tories in 2019, and now 56 back Starmer's Labour instead. A swing, according to the report, of 15% to Labour. The maths is extraordinary, but given breakdowns relating to other parties aren't included, I can only report the figures they are giving. Make them as you will. Functionally, they're claiming an increase in this vote too. Now, I'd worry if the person described in the report backed me as to what they thought I actually represented. Finally, person 6 is the rural right, the smallest group of all, a third of whom will be retired, and they're all financially secure, likely owning their homes outright. These are the sort who still think Liz Truss makes a good MP, presumably. They're on the right, both economically and socially, as conservative as you can find, opposing redistribution of wealth, thinking working people get enough. Labour Together admit they aren't getting this vote. 85% voting Tory in 2019. This has, however, dropped to 55% now, apparently, with 28% bleeding off to the even more right-wing Reform UK party. All of this, when taken together, shows a red shift, apparently, hence the title of the report. A move to Labour from the Tories in the eyes of these red Tories posing as a think tank. There's plenty they haven't considered, though. There's a 7th, very important person who is not nearly as imaginary as Labour Together's Workington man or Stevenage woman, and that is Little Miss, I'm not going to vote, I'd rather spoil my ballot, so kiss my rosy red arse. Clearly, with a name that long, the family had an argument over what to call her. But this is the non-voter. This is a demographic growing by the day as disillusionment and the lack of choice being put before the electorate means increasingly people are going to choose not to bother at all, and turnout will drop. This can skew election results if significant enough. Sure, plenty of people are sick of the Tories, but equally, they're not taken in by dishonest pledges like freezing council tax, especially when it's already unaffordable for too many and cannot be delivered by the party promising it. There's nobody on offer at this moment in time prepared to take the important steps to fix the country, appeal to these people, and as much as local elections should not be about the national picture, they are always an influence on such things. Otherwise, leading politicians would never get involved with them. So there's little to bother leaving the house for here. It's depressing as sin, but that's how they all like it. Sunak and Starmer, red Tories and blue Tories alike. What Labour Together are also forgetting in their electability predictions is the inherent dislikability of Starmer himself, though. He has all the charisma of plankton and grows on you in the same way as a kidney stone. He is uninspiring, irritating, with a voice like a drill with a flat battery, generating about as much enthusiasm as said battery does power. He wanted the top job to the point he helped sabotage Corbyn's Labour on more than one occasion, from that Brexit vote in 2019, which he swiftly abandoned his Remain position after, to the chicken coup of resignations to try and force Corbyn out before that, his being one of the last resignations after loads of others had already done so, very much following the herd like the beige brill cream sheep that he is. You also cannot ignore the Labour right's record in power. As much as they point and sneer at the 2019 general election where Labour lost 60 seats, Gordon Brown lost more seats in 2010, and Labour won more votes than both Brown did then and Ed Miliband did in 2015. The Labour right haven't won any seats, as I said earlier, since the 1997 Blair landslide, and he kept losing seats thereafter. The Labour right failed to achieve power before that, throughout the 80s and early 90s, after deposing the previous socialist leader in Michael Foot in 1983. Theirs is not a winning record. Blair's bucking of the trend because he was a great salesman. He was young and fresh-faced at the time. Look at the state of him now. But he was up against somebody at that time as lively as Keir Starmer is now in John Major back then. Who's the duller, Major or Starmer? There's a vote to be had, isn't there? Now, I'm not saying Sunak is exactly the life and soul of the party here either, you understand, but dear God, it's not hard to show more life than either of those two, is it? Keir Starmer is boring and irritating, where the Labour right have proved they need to be good salespeople to con their way into power because policies are something they don't have, just carrying on the status quo as they intend to, just taking their turn in serving the establishment from the Tories before changing hands once again. He will not inspire the non-voter, the numbers of which will grow, which will bring with it questions of democratic legitimacy. They have no answer to either of these questions, instead seeking to make us look at their 6 iterations of what they think pass for the British public here and now, and have us all debating over which ones that we belong in, and whether or not we should be offended or not by them. But all it really tells me is that the biggest demographic of all, those who don't bother because they see no point in voting, play no part in Starmer's Labour's path to power at all, and nor does any effort to get them engaged again after his predecessor showed some success at doing just that, because they don't feature at all in all 56 pages of this report. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this video, please do hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the next one. Also look out for me on social media and other interesting stuff by clicking on the Linktree link in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Cheers, folks.